Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you happen to be listening to our next interview blog. As you know, we at Employee Matters have dealt with hundreds of businesses over the years now. And what we do know is that the majority of businesses experience workplace conflict. And in some cases, that's every day that's happening in their business. And apart from being exhausting, it's an extremely high level of drain on your productivity. And often it can be an unresolved, ongoing issue. And sometimes there's just two people involved, or sometimes there's groups of people involved that aren't working well together in the workplace. And what in preparation for this, what I found fascinating in terms of the research is where people use, where they have workplace conflict and they use mediation, over 80% of those are resolved successfully. And that means the individual returns to work and there are successful outcomes for everyone and probably financial outcomes in the business. So I'd love to ask you what you think it would mean for you if everybody in your workplace really got on or knew how to work together, and what would that do to your productivity and profitability numbers? So to discuss all of this and more, I am absolutely thrilled that we have Alison Jones, who is a guru in this space, and I have to say niche sure because she's recently got married, congratulations, to talk about from dispute resolution, to talk about everything mediation, because I think it's really important that businesses know this is an option and that there is a way forward. So welcome, Ali.
Thank you very much, Natasha.
Great to have you here. So let's start with you. I'm fascinated by your background because I think you've done a switch or a pivot. So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up where you are now?
Well, I have done a pivot. I am still a dispute resolution resolver, and I have a background in law, but I'm actually a nationally accredited mediator now, and but also practice in the law still as well. And I was a partner in a boutique law firm in Adelaide. I decided to actually work on resolution using other methods other than courts. And that's how I got into mediation. And from there, I built a mediation practice and have therefore resolved hundreds of workplace disputes for lots of employers and employees around the country.
So that's fascinating. Alison, why did you make that pivot? What made you change from we resolved this in court to actually I think there's a different way we could be doing this?
Feeling uncomfortable about the fees and invoices that I was sending out each month, which were, really getting up there on a regular basis of, $2,000 to $5,000 at a time. And that obviously was a monthly invoice, and it became very expensive for everybody to utilise courts and legal services. And so there had to be a better way. And mediation is an early intervention. It is more personal and people have control of the outcome. And so it can be used to resolve workplace disputes very quickly and effectively and cost effectively as well.
So that brings me to my next question. Given that statistic, which blew my mind, that 80% of these problems can be resolved once mediation is involved, why don't more businesses in Australia use mediation?
From my experience over the last 4 years or so, it's because a lot of businesses don't know how to access mediation. They don't necessarily know a mediator or how to get in touch with a mediator. And therefore they don't necessarily think to bring in somebody outside the business. They feel very responsible for resolving the disputes themselves. So in smaller businesses, it's obviously the husband or wife that own the business, that they think that they have to resolve the dispute. HR managers feel that they're employed to resolve disputes. And so they don't actually think of the benefits of bringing someone in external to the business to assist in this situation that can be independent of the business and to bring that objectivity and environment to resolve the tension and the difficulties that are currently being experienced within the business.
That's great. So why do we have conflict in the workplace? Really broad question. Why does it exist?
It exists because we're human and we have emotions. But within workplaces, we expect people to work together harmoniously. And obviously everybody is different And as a result of that, there become cultural issues within an organisation about how that behaviour and conduct and language is managed. And there are team dynamics. And then obviously we all have different performance approaches, attitudes to our work, and that performance needs to be managed. So if in a harmonious workplace all is going well, everybody is respecting everybody and trusting everybody, and trust is high, and everyone is towing the line and putting in 100% effort in accordance with their job description. However, that doesn't always happen, and as a result of that, where there's a perception even that someone is not pulling their weight or someone isn't doing the right thing, conflict results.
So what is the impact to the business where there is conflict in the workforce? What does it look like so that people can recognise it?
Okay, well, initially tension builds up between staff. It might be just between two staff, and that tension might become just snippy comments, or it might become inappropriate comments. That can also then result in behavioural changes where people stop talking to each other, or teams just ultimately become dysfunctional because they're not working cohesively and collaboratively in the way that the business needs to move.
And I've seen examples where there's quite open anarchy or sabotage, where one team's playing off against the other.
That's right. There can be rivalry between teams, or it's just been allowed to get away with inappropriate behaviour or conduct for too long. And so it becomes a bit systemic. So if someone sees someone else using bad language, they think they can use bad language too. And so it's a slippery slope downhill. And as business owners know, there is just so much on their mind. Someone complaining about someone perhaps using inappropriate language doesn't necessarily register high on the dashboard of things that the business owner needs to attend to. And sometimes it gets ignored for a bit too long, and events start to overtake, and all of a sudden there's a bigger conflict than perhaps they can handle or should have necessarily occurred had it been dealt with quickly and effectively early.
So mediation probably means many things to different people. What's your definition of mediation?
Mediation is a process where the mediator is independent and provides the opportunity in a safe environment for people to resolve their own disputes themselves. So a mediator is not like a judge or a decision maker. The mediator is neutral, but helps the parties to identify what are the concerns that need to be discussed and resolved, and allows them to come up with the options of how it can be resolved, and ultimately how people are going to work and behave together in a harmonious, safe, comfortable environment confidently.
Moving forward positively. So could you share a case study with us, Ali, of an example of when you've used mediation and how it worked?
Yes, just last week I did a workplace mediation for a family bakery, and they have about 50 staff all up, and the bakers actually work in very confined space. They're often bending down to ovens, and they're having to pass one another and sidle past with trays of dough and baked goods. And in this example, it's a very good example of how a joke can just go too far and affect everybody in the workplace in a very detrimental way. Turns out, and I'll just use pseudonym names for this case study, but the bakers all have a very jokey work environment, and some of those jokes have some sexual innuendo, and they all enjoy and say they enjoy that light-hearted environment. However, on one occasion, when, say, Linda was bending down to put something in the oven. Pam walked past and kneed her in the bottom. And it was meant in a jokey way, but unfortunately, Linda felt the knee on her private parts in an area that, as she said to me, that only her husband should be able to touch, and it caused her such distress that she just found that she couldn't work in the same area as Pam. So she went to her boss, Diane, and said, look, this has happened and I can't work in this environment. And Diane thought that, well, it was just sort of
get over it,
a joke, and it should have been okay, and she should just get over it and everything will be fine and move on. But for Linda, she really was quite damaged by it and didn't appreciate that it wasn't being taken as seriously as it was. And then from there she stopped coming to work because she said she couldn't work with Pam. And Diane actually got me to get involved to see whether I could help address the situation for Linda and Pam and the business, because while Linda was off work, everyone else was having to work very hard, pick up the slack. Pam couldn't believe that this was a suggestion of some sort of sexual assault or something, and so she was really concerned. Both of these women had worked for the organisation for a long time.
So a lot of knowledge capital they're carrying around with them.
Yeah. And anyway, I spoke with, as in the mediation process, each of Linda, Pam and Diane separately to hear their perspectives on the situation. They had 3 very different perspectives on what had happened and how it had happened, but all of them were willing to acknowledge that something had happened. And that was the first necessary step in being able to move forward, is an acknowledgement that something's happened. And then we had a joint session. In the joint session, I invited each of them to let us know what brought them to the mediation. And obviously they had different reasons for being present. Diane, obviously, as the business owner, wanted it to have a safe and harmonious work environment. She also wanted Linda back, and Pam to be able to continue to work together in the small kitchen areas, and to be able to work together safely and without risk of this happening again. Linda obviously wanted the situation acknowledged, and that perhaps the behaviours that were going on had gone too far, and that perhaps from her perspective that the jokey environment was becoming more and more personal and perhaps too far and needed to go on it. Pam was just shocked about it, but and disappointed, had taken it very personally, but recognised that she wanted Linda back because she was under a lot more pressure at work, as were the rest of the team without Linda being there. And Pam was very apologetic about the inappropriate touching, and could not believe that this was as serious as it was. So the 3 of them sharing that, from that we created an agenda of what to be resolved, and it was very much about what is acceptable work conduct, behaviours, practice, language, and we created an agenda that went on the whiteboard, and then we worked our way through it. And by working through the agenda for each agenda item, we were able to explore to the extent we needed to what had happened, to be able to unpack it, to then say, okay, we accept that that happened, we recognise that this is something that we don't want to happen again for anyone in the organisation, and so we'd like to do something about it. And then for each agenda item, whether it be language or behaviours, and thereafter how if there is a concern raised, it should be addressed in future, we were able to come up with an outcome document that was not that was private and confidential between Linda and Pam, but for Diane, as a business owner, she got to take out of this actions that she could then implement at a policy level.
Workplace behaviour.
So it ultimately was a very successful resolution where Linda and Pam were able to restore that trust, which had completely gone. Respect for each other improved, and Diane was able to have both staff working harmoniously and cooperatively again, but also was able to review the behaviours across the workplace more generally following the mediation outcome.
Which is so critical around that appropriate workplace behaviour, because I think that was a great example, Ali, of where, people don't always intend this, they don't intend the offence, but once it happens, it's hard to, it's like it's a Pandora's box. It's out, and you can't shove it back in unless you go through that process. So it immediately occurred to me when you were chatting that, there was a risk of a work cover claim. There was, the cost of people being off work, and also impacts to the other business. But what is the typical ROI for mediation and intervention when you've seen it work in businesses?
It is an investment by an organisation, and that investment can be, $3,000 plus GST for half a day mediation, which this one was, which includes all of those initial consultations and discussions and meetings. But
really, $3,000 compared to having somebody off, potentially losing other people because they're working too hard, is not really that massive of amount of an investment.
That's right. But I also, as a mediator, use it to good effect with the staff to let them know how valued they are and how important they are to the business, that the business doesn't want to see either of them resign or either of them on a work cover claim or a stress claim, and that they are willing to invest money in me as the mediator to help them to be able to improve their workplace situation. So staff then appreciate how serious their concerns and complaints and grievances are being taken.
Yeah.
And it does, while it's not bringing necessarily a formality that courts might have, it brings about the necessary seriousness to wanting to resolve it. It does demonstrate that everyone that is therefore participating in the mediation is there genuinely and in good faith to work out a way forward.
So what would you say are the top 3 things that employers could do to reduce or control conflict in the workplace?
Listen to their staff. And when I say listen, not just have an open door policy where people come in and say, look, something's happened, but actually effectively listen and ask questions about what's gone on. So taking a little bit more time with staff individually to hear from their perspective how the workplace is at grassroots. And I think that really is the number one thing, is listening to staff. Making time to speak with them individually is the second most important thing. And then acknowledging or doing something about what they've been told in a demonstrable way completes that circle of being heard, acknowledging, and then recognising and giving value to that. And that's what I think employers often just don't feel that they have the time to do because they have so many other business pressures.
Yeah, but it can, really come and help them out when they need it. So tell us about your business. What do you do? Who are your typical clients? How do you help your clients?
Okay, so I am one of the practitioners at Shaw Dispute Resolution. We have 30 mediators, and now we've got investigators to do workplace investigations as well around the country. And we help businesses and government agencies to resolve workplace conflict and disputes and issues and get to the bottom of things. So it might be a misconduct concern, or it might be a complaint about a supervisor. Those types of issues come up all the time. Or two managers, important and integral to the business, won't talk. And what we try and do is help the businesses move past those difficult times quickly and effectively.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think as a HR practitioner ourselves, we get involved in this sort of stuff, but there's a certain level where we can have some impact, and then it gets beyond that. And that's where we need to call a specialist in like yourselves. And that's what we do. So what do you, sorry, go on.
I was just going to mention our typical clients would be small to medium-sized businesses that need assistance. They might have an HR manager. So obviously the HR manager would give us a call, but sometimes the HR manager is too close to the situation, and there might be a perception that the HR manager is being paid by the same employer, so a bit biased and not really independent.
Yeah.
So we'll get called by a business owner or by HR managers, or a return to work person in larger organisations, and we'll just have a chat with them about what's going on, and to help them work out what is the best dispute resolution strategy for them first.
Brilliant. What do you love about what you do, Alison?
I think it's seeing people resolve their disputes themselves. So since mediation, my belief in people to be able to acknowledge their contribution to a problem and their willingness to resolve that problem has just escalated so much that people love their jobs, they love what they do. What they don't like is somehow how other people are affecting them and how they work. So keeping everybody happy in any business is always a really tough, tall order, but using mediation where they are empowered to take responsibility for their actions and the outcome is really, really fulfilling.
It sounds like having that framework creates a safe space where people can actually admit they might be in the wrong or that they could have done something better, but also empowers them to come up with a resolution, which obviously, as we know, when someone tells you what you're going to do versus you working it out and owning it, it's going to be have much more longevity and chance of success.
Yes, it's a learning opportunity for everybody with a sustainable outcome. It's not just a 48-hour fix.
Okay. I think people are going to want to get in touch with you, Alison. How do they get in touch with you if they want to learn more about how you and Assure can help them?
Well, the easiest way would be to call our 1300 number, which is 1300 768 496. That's 1300 768 496. And they will get through immediately to start talking about dispute resolution strategies and their situation with somebody that knows how to handle these things. And then the other way is by email, which is resolve@shawdr.com.au. Shaw, SHAWDR.com.au.
That's brilliant. Look, I think there's been enormous insights and tips in this interview blog. And I think, this is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I think if we could decrease the amount of workplace conflict in our environments and in our businesses, we're going to be more productive. We're going to be more profitable. And that's what most business owners want. And your team are going to be happier. So huge advocate for it and for you. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant chatting to you, and look forward to continuing to partner with you to help more of our clients.
Thanks, Natasha.
Take care. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.